Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Lisa.
That's
and
okay.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So we are honored and delighted to welcome Professor David Mosey of King's College London, who's here with us today. It's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Mosey. He is professor at King's College London Centre of Construction Law and Dispute Resolution. And in 2021, David was appointed by the UK government to lead as an independent review of public sector construction frameworks in order to establish a gold standard for frameworks and framework contract designed to meet net zero carbon targets and to deliver improved value, efficiency, and safety. David has been described in the Chamber's Guide to the Legal Profession as a partnering guru who gives something to the industry. He is principal author of the PPC 2000 collaborative contract and of the FAC1 and TAC1 alliance contracts, adopted so far on procurements worth over £90 billion. So we thought that it would be very interesting for professionals who deal with collaborative matters, with mediation, alternative dispute resolution, to be acquainted with the collaborative procurement initiatives that David will describe. So over to you, David. Thank you so much for being with us.
Claudia, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody at International Mediation Awareness Week. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. Please say if you can't. But it's a real pleasure to talk to you today. And I will try and share something of how collaborative initiatives deal with risk management and deal with some of the things that mediation is attempting to achieve. The consensual resolution of problems, because problems always arise on construction projects. They are very complicated ways of working, technically, financially, behaviourally, commercially, with many, many parties involved. So we cannot pretend that calling something collaborative takes all the risks away. But in the same way that mediation tries to keep the risks under the parties' control, so does collaborative procurement. And I'm going to be looking at two dimensions of that, as you can see: avoiding the Bermuda Triangle and escaping from Groundhog Day. These are my two metaphors for this morning. And I will talk a little bit about how collaborative techniques deliver value, but also, of course, how they manage risks. And I hope this will be of interest to you. I should say that the work I've done in the field of collaboration is not limited to the UK. I've had the pleasure of working with practitioners and academics in Italy, leading a civil law approach to collaborative instruments, notably Professor Sara Valaguzza, who may be on this call, but also in other jurisdictions. I do think that these techniques and instruments are transnational, and they are not in any way limited to common law jurisdictions. Okay, interesting. Struggling to move my slide on. There we go. We start with the basics of what is construction procurement, because it is a word that gets misunderstood. Sometimes, particularly in the public sector, people relate it only to the team selection processes, the open, restricted, competitive with negotiation, competitive dialogue procedures, the evaluation of bids, which is hugely important. If we're going to get value from a project, we have to understand what value is and find a way to look at quality, environmental and social impact, as well as cost. We understand how important that is. Sometimes people get fixated only with those selection procedures as if they are the best way to deliver results. Others, including lawyers, I must say many lawyers that I deal with, think construction procurement is all about the structure, distribution and integration of contractual roles and risks and warranties and the transfer of liability to consultants and contractors. Yes, it is up to a point, but I've long since learned that drafting a contract that pushes risk onto other people only results in them finding ways to push the risk back to the client. Other decisions in procurement, of course, are capital expenditure against operational expenditure. We still haven't grasped how to procure for the whole life of an asset. And if we have any interest in the future of the planet, we should be extremely interested in the operational cost and environmental impact of our completed buildings. But really, I suppose, to answer my own question, construction procurement is an integrated series of activities, and they should be designed not to push problems onto other people, not to set them up to be blamed for defects, but they should be designed to deliver results, to improve value and to manage risks. That, I would suggest, is what we're talking about. And interestingly, in the midst of lockdown and the pandemic that we've all suffered, the UK government worked on a thing called the Construction Playbook, partly to drive a recovery from COVID-19, partly to build a future economic model for construction to improve safety and to improve results, and partly to deliver better, faster and greener solutions. And it was different to many government initiatives because it is mandated on a comply or explain basis. So it is not guidance, it is a requirement linked to spending controls. And it requires a collaborative approach. It expressly requires collaborative procurement, and it looks at long-term contracts governing multiple projects, because it sees that if you just go one project at a time, you make very slow progress. And it promised this review that Claudia referred to, the review of public sector frameworks leading to a new gold standard. That was one of its policies, and I was appointed to lead that review. Now, it covers many things, this construction playbook, and so, of course, therefore does the framework review. It requires clients to adopt modern methods of construction, including off-site manufacture. It requires them to adopt BIM in terms of digital information management, to use something that I will talk about this morning called early supply chain involvement, and to focus on outcomes, outcome-based performance measurement with the support of agreed costs and the protection of profits, and also prompt payment. I mean, I don't know how many jurisdictions are represented on this webinar, but there is no doubt that payment is not dealt with promptly in the industry, and that people squeeze the supply chain by paying them late and seem to think that that is acceptable practice. We have seen many businesses go under, become insolvent as a result of those practices. It really is not constructive behaviour. So trying to agree accurate costs, to avoid the gambling, to avoid the gaming of the position, and therefore to understand profits so as to protect them, to take all the uncertainty out of the commercial model is also part of this Construction Playbook initiative. And not surprisingly, it is supported by the industry, and they signed, 50 representatives signed a compact with industry. But it brings us to the question of how is all that brought to life? How do we actually make it work? I should also mention briefly that the Construction Playbook focuses on net zero carbon. And as we come to the end of COP26, for better or for worse, we know the impact of construction activities on the environment. And there is a clear requirement that all public sector clients and industry representatives set strategies and plans for meeting net zero carbon greenhouse gas emissions by or ahead of 2050, and that these are aligned under an overarching sustainability framework with systems and processes to ensure that projects and programs of work deliver on those targets, and with solutions coming from potential suppliers accompanied by a whole life carbon assessment, so the operational phase as well as the construction phase. And with the recognition that SMEs, which is small and medium-sized enterprises, who have those insights into modern methods of construction and innovative technologies, to make sure that they those are captured so as to minimize greenhouse gas footprints of proposed solutions. Now, all those are just fine words, and we've been hearing a lot of fine words in Glasgow over the last week or so. To put them into practice definitely depends on commitments between multiple organisations on multiple projects, and those are contractual commitments, not just aspirations. And there we get to the problem. The Bermuda Triangle, as we're all aware, is where things mysteriously disappear. Ships, aircraft, and in this case, collaborative procurement initiatives. What seemed like a good idea suddenly vanishes. And I've been working in collaborative procurement for over 20 years. Hardest game in the world, collaboration, 20 years, and still I see good initiatives disappear into the Bermuda Triangle of idealistic debate, where we have very fine, wonderful plans, but secretly people are cynically criticising them and saying they cannot possibly be done, and here are 100 reasons why you can't work with other people and you shouldn't change anything. And the third part of the triangle becomes therefore these unrealised good intentions. Things do not actually change. Now, the construction playbook wants to cut through that. It proposes practical collaboration, and it looks at long-term frameworks based around principles that align objectives, success measures, targets and incentives, so as to enable joint work on improving value and reducing risk. So we're not in an idealistic world. We are in the world occupied by mediators who wish to reduce risk by resolving issues. And the work I have done over the last year now on the independent framework review, which is going to be called Constructing the Gold Standard, provides 24 recommendations. I consulted 120 UK review contributors, and it proposes a combination of solutions for frameworks, for framework contracts, and for action plans based on evidence and integrating 4 components, which I will stop and look at with you. Framework strategy, the intention of the parties; framework procurement, the information they exchange; framework contracts, the integration of their roles; and framework management, the incentivization of their work. And this diagram, I'm not very good at art, but this is my best shot. If we want to improve value, and if we want to manage risks, and we want to do this before we put ourselves in the hands of a mediator, and I would respectfully point out that the work of a mediator is never conclusive unless the parties agree. So we are, with mediation, in the realm of agreement rather than an enforced third-party solution. If we want to agree something ahead of getting the mediator to help us, we need these 4 things. We need a strategy that sets out our intentions openly and honestly, and make sure that those intentions match the client's intention and the contractors and consultants' intention. We need to use the selection process for the team to share information from the client and from the bidders. We need to use contracts not to transfer risk to the maximum, not to confuse people. We need clear and simple contracts. And I have to say that if we don't have standard forms, we are creating an unnecessary expense and burden for clients and bidders, and we are creating confusion. So assuming that we have clear and comprehensible contracts, we need to use them to integrate these different commercial interests. And we need to use management to incentivize people. And I don't mean by throwing extra money at them. I mean by helping, making sure we meet when there's an issue, including a potential problem. Managers at strategic framework level and at project level have to try to achieve results, not just submit reports and not just issue instructions. But then we come to my second metaphor, the groundhog. And we've all been in many online meetings where it's been a pleasure to see somebody's cat or dog emerge. So I think a slide with an animal on it is something that we're all used to at the moment. So we have a groundhog here, and you will remember the film Groundhog Day, where the same day occurs again and again. And I do feel that the missed opportunities and lost learning of construction is a bit like that. If we do one project at a time, if we don't connect the projects, then we're rebuilding relationships, we're rebuilding systems of cooperation and efficiency from scratch, from the beginning, every time. And that's exhausting and wasteful and uncertain, and it's very annoying because you get really good projects and really good teams, and then they have to disband and go their separate ways. And you get very little opportunity to adopt improvements on other projects. You get limited trust, not because people are bad or cynical, but because they just don't know each other if they've only worked on one project. And then when it comes to the commercial, fundamental for every economy, you need investment, you need innovation, and you need motivation, and they're very limited if there is no prospect of their efforts on one project leading to more projects. So it is commercial, personal, behavioural common sense to look at a way of escaping from Groundhog Day, to create a construction framework where clients and suppliers join forces on multiple projects. And you will say to me, but my client or I only have one project. I don't have multiple projects. How can I do a framework? Well, in the UK, it is interesting to see there are organisations called framework providers, not only in the public sector, in the public and private sector, who have done the pre-selection of a group of contractors for a range of projects, have set out their profit and overhead, have tested their capabilities, and then you run mini competitions amongst those. But at least you get, and clients can come in to that club, if you like. They pay a fee, but they become part of the learning process. So even a client with one project can participate in a framework, and we shouldn't turn our back on a framework just because we don't individually carry a huge program of work. So that's the premise, as far as I'm concerned, that if we want to make real progress, we can't do it on isolated individual projects. We can only do it by forming intelligent connections, and we need collaboration in order to do that. We also need early supply chain involvement to do that, ESI, as it is called in the construction playbook. And again, we keep the contractor out of the picture. Architects and engineers work with the client on design, and then those designs are given to contractors to price without inviting their views, without inviting the views of the manufacturers and the suppliers and the specialists who have to bring those designs to life. So ESI, mandated, remember, on a comply or explain basis, brings in the tier one contractor, but also subcontractors and suppliers during a pre-construction phase of a project to input to design and costing and risk management, again, preparing ourselves for the risks that arise, and the structuring of the project or the program of work. And this is seen not as a way of, not as involving additional time. It is seen as a way of reducing end-to-end timescales, identifying opportunity and mitigating risk, accessing industry experts' knowledge, so we actually are not assuming what a specialist mechanical and electrical contractor will do, or a cladding contractor will do, or a groundworks contractor will do, or a manufacturer of any part of the building. We're engaging with them during the pre-construction phase to agree the cost, to agree the design, to agree the risk, to agree the program. And this is the UK government. They're not idealistic, they're not simplistic. They're saying investing time in this can lead to more effective designs, reduced changes and reduced potential cost increases. That is the proposition of ESI, and I've worked under this system repeatedly. One example I'll give you here is Surrey County Council. using ESI supply chain collaboration with Kier, Aggregate Industries, Marshall Surfacing for what was a government trial project. You can find it in a case study online. And they had a very simple proposition. They were working on highways, they had £100 million, and they said, we will only spend that money if you give us £120 million of value. We have an election coming up, we have to prove efficiency. And they did that by re-examining the subcontract and supply arrangements, and they found 12% of cost savings. These included some savings from the main contractor, but a lot of savings from subcontractors and suppliers by giving them longer term contracts and more active contributions, not just by demanding discounts, by actually working with them to see what mattered to them and to see what more they could do. And the contractor admitted they'd never had a client who had wanted to do this. This was a 4 to 5 year period of work, I have to say. It was a framework, so it was not just one project. But the subcontractors and suppliers said, if we are involved in the planning of work and the developing of continuity, we will discount our rates by 2%. If you give us a minimum annual volume, we will discount our rates by 5%. If you will give us minimum individual orders so that we're not wasting our time on small pieces of work, we'll give you another 2%. If you pay us on time, we'll give you 1%. And if you let us use some storage facilities in a client depot, we'll give you another 2%. These are very basic commercial calculations that you would not know about if we didn't sit down collaboratively with the client, the contractor and the subcontractors. It isn't going to emerge on paper. It isn't going to emerge during a public procurement process. These are, to me, the practical issues around collaboration. And it wasn't only the money. There was a 10-year warranty offered because of the extra influence that the suppliers and subcontractors had. So we got into the whole life model. My point about operational cost and capital cost, a 10-year warranty for material and pavement design. Better joint risk management. There were no disputes over this 5-year period. There were also no health and safety incidents because they were looking at risk jointly as a team, not privately for the protection of future disputes. They were able to engage apprentices because the subcontractors had longer contracts. What we discovered was that even when the client gives a 5-year contract, the contractor tends to give a 6-month subcontract just in case something goes wrong. And you can't train an apprentice in 6 months. So if you set up a system where the subcontracts match the main contract, suddenly other things become possible. And then when we come back to net zero carbon, you can arrange a strategy. So tar is carcinogenic. It's not only waste, it is toxic waste, but it can be recycled instead of going to landfill. But you need a recycling plant, and you need to invest in a recycling plant. And a 5-year period of work justifies that in a way that a 1-year period of work does not. Multiple projects enable you to achieve things that individual projects do not. And for the public procurement lawyers on this call, there is no breach of public procurement regulations because these processes are led by the contractor, not by the client. So the reworking of the subcontractor and supply chain arrangements do not change the overall position under the main contract. They improve the delivery through the supply chain. That's for a separate discussion, I'm sure, but people always ask me, doesn't it breach public sector procurement? No, it doesn't. And then we come to an interesting question, another roads project. Can this supply chain collaboration work on a public-private partnership? And there are many of those around the European jurisdictions, many of those in Italy that I'm well aware of. And I've looked at this in the UK, and there is joint working amongst the PPP, PFI team, but it doesn't involve the client, and it usually is done in preparing for a major bid process. Really, because the client and its funders are setting a fixed financial model and expecting bidders to conform to that model. And it is a very arm's length process, so the collaboration goes on within the bid team. There was a report a long time ago by BPFI that said this is a missed opportunity because the more successful PFI PPP projects have allowed close interaction between building users and the supply chain at an early stage. That depends on changing the fundamental PFI model. Certainly I've seen programs of PPP work where even after the more arm's length bid process at the beginning, there is machinery to work more closely together on follow-up PPP projects. But there is another of those trial projects that is available online, which is the Connect Plus PPP that operates the M25 motorway that surrounds London, where they set up what they called a sustainable business culture model, which meant they wanted collaborative processes led by their contractors and a balanced scorecard where all supply chain members are assessing each other to ensure that there is a clear understanding of what is working and a clear opportunity to put things right without going to dispute resolution. So their sustainable business culture model involved a lot of time spent with people and a lot of time spent on evaluation, but it succeeded. And it led to the analysis jointly of technical and logistical challenges and the creation of solutions through new designs and alternative materials. So in terms of risk management and avoidance of disputes and less work for mediators, sorry about that, it was very successful. When it came to savings, they didn't find their way to the client because the PPP was operating under a fixed financial model. So the savings were good news for the private sector. However, the qualitative benefits were something that would extend beyond the life of the PPP and that were transferable to other client programs. So it was seen as benefiting the public sector client in those ways. I want to turn to FAC1. Sorry, let me go back. There has been a concern, as I mentioned earlier, with bespoke contracts costing money. Bespoke contracts are good fun for lawyers. I've enjoyed drafting many of them over the years, but it was perceived back in 2012 by a UK government working party that the general lack of standard form framework arrangements makes it difficult for clients to procure frameworks on a consistent basis. And although Surrey and Connect Plus were bespoke agreements, they were showing the scope for improved outcomes through direct contractual links. So the next step was to standardise that. And that came in the form of FAC1, the FAC1 Framework Alliance Contract, which is this very flexible multi-party framework contract integrating any combination of team members in any country. And I had the great pleasure to work with colleagues in Milan on one of its earliest uses as a BIM integrator on the Eliscati School project that you may have heard about, and if you haven't heard about, do contact Professor Sara Balaguzza, who was the legal inspiration behind that work. FAC1 has also been adapted through Bulgarian, German, Italian, Portuguese, Russian and Spanish translations, so it has crossed boundaries and it has done so with very little difficulty. It's being used on EPC projects and PPPs, the University Campus project in Milan, for example, with Lend-Lease, and also by Enel Green Power on wind turbine projects in Spain and Brazil. So it is not only a UK instrument, it is, as Claudia said, being used on £90 billion worth of procurements in the UK, which is an astounding amount. And you can find out more from me if you'd like to. You're very welcome to email me and I'll give you more details of these different users. But as an instrument at a strategic level to integrate the parties and to integrate the projects, it offers a standard form that saves people money and builds a body of shared knowledge through consistent contractual provisions. It gives a level of confidence and clarity. It has a focus on net zero carbon. Its definition of improved value, and all the Alliance members commit to this through a timetable of agreed actions. This definition includes improved sustainability, which comprises measures intended to reduce carbon emissions, to reduce the use of energy and/or natural and man-made resources, to improve waste management, to improve employment and training opportunities, and otherwise to protect or improve the condition of the environment or the well-being of people. Now, yes, that's just an objective, but I don't know any other standard form contract that makes that clear. And given that this is a contract with action plans it's set out in a timetable, it enables you to take those things that are promised during the selection process, during the procurement process, and turn them into a plan of action over the life of the contract, so that we don't see procurement only as the selection process or only as the moment we go into contract, so that we run, if you remember those 4 stages I talked about, of strategy, procurement, contracting and management in a consistent way. And that, frankly, is the only way we are going to deliver our net zero carbon targets and save our planet. You know, this isn't for someone else to do or some government to issue regulations. It's for us to do on our construction projects in a strategic manner. And if we don't do that, we shouldn't complain about the poor performance of construction environmentally and its impact on the world we live in. We have this opportunity, the contractual mechanisms are in front of us. Now, Construction Playbook looks at FAC1 very favourably, I'm delighted to say. It promotes the use of frameworks with this focus on shared objectives and risk measures, success measures, targets and incentives, this joint working idea to improve value and reduce risk. And it says expressly that FAC1 is a good example of a standard form framework contract that can achieve this and many of the ambitions set out in this playbook. So we have an endorsement of the contract from the playbook. It was very encouraging, and we have many UK government users adhering, of course, to public sector procurement in everything they do. And as Claudia said, this current use on 90 billion of UK projects is very encouraging. It covers custodial, prisons, education, health, highways and housing, and it uses frequently off-site construction and BIM. And one example, a major example at the moment, is an alliance between 4 contractors and their specialist subcontractors with a collaborative BIM protocol, which owes a lot to the Lescati project, procured by the Ministry of Justice on a programme of 4 new prisons with 10,000 places. That is a Construction Playbook Pathfinder project at the moment, using FAC1 to integrate all the different parties and to integrate the 4 projects. So we turn to, I beg your pardon, to collaborative dispute resolution, and areas that will be very familiar to people on this call, and you will have more experience than me. And you will probably be very familiar with this graphic. Negotiation on the left, mediation in the middle, and adjudication on the right. We're looking at consensual ways through negotiation, and aspects of mediation are equally consensual, where the parties are agreeing a way out of trouble. To do that, they need facts, they need information, they need neutral fact-finding, they may need expert appraisal, and they may need early neutral evaluation. But, you know, there are variations on these roles and variations on the techniques for what I call here consensus building. And facilitative mediation definitely plays a part in that. But you will all be very familiar with the distinction between that and evaluative mediation. You know, facilitative mediation is helping the parties to agree something between themselves rather than working it out for them and delivering a decision. And FAC1 and collaborative contracts fit into that spectrum, not surprisingly, on the left-hand side, as it were, looking for these consensus building techniques. So I'm going to start with a picture of Manama in Bahrain, some of you may know, and the construction project for a new bank, the Al Capita Bank, which is on the right-hand side, a very unusual building, hanging from a steel frame, very innovative. Skidmore, Owings and Merrill designed it, and we used an adaptation of a FIDIC contract, a collaborative adaptation with early supply chain involvement, and an independent advisor, who was me, to help resolve disputes as a type of facilitative mediator. And we had terms of reference and timescales for any negotiation that would be supported by this independent advisor. They were added to the FIDIC standard form contract. But the problem was we already had an engineer in place, Atkins as it happens, and they refused to sign the collaborative provisions. So we were collaborating contractually with the contractor and their subcontractors and other team members, the project manager, the cost consultant, but the engineer refused, and we didn't enforce that participation. What happened then, there was a dispute between the engineer and the contractor regarding the inspection of structural steel, which was a very important component of this project, and it was not easy. We did succeed in avoiding arbitration. We did have to agree expressly that every discussion, every exchange was without prejudice, and that the negotiated solution would have binding effect only after signature of a signed settlement agreement. And we did achieve those things, but I must say it would have been a lot easier if the engineer had committed to the collaborative systems. But they felt, as engineers sometimes do, that this was compromising their power and authority. They didn't like the idea of consensus building. So when we look back at our table of dispute resolution options, consensus building is not always attractive to everyone, not certainly those organizations who prefer to give orders rather than be part of an agreement. And we have to be aware of that. It is not seen as a good idea by everybody. We're all the product of our experience, and engineers sometimes, and I'm not picking on engineers, sometimes feel they've got to get things done, and that they could be trapped by a process of agreement. So dispute avoidance and early warning, we can of course avert disputes if we're aware of a problem earlier on. Going back to the Connect Plus M25 trial project, the report on that case study said joint ownership of the model by the client and supply chain members has enabled transparent and timely transmission of information throughout the supply chain and the early identification and solution of potential problems. So their sustainable business culture, their engagement all the time with contractors and subcontractors gave that transparency and sharing of information. I think that's so important. If we don't share the information, we cannot solve the problem. So FAC1 provides for early warning by an alliance member of any matter adversely affecting or threatening the alliance or its own performance or the performance of another alliance member, and that goes for review by a core group of named individuals. And they have to unanimously agree a solution. So in response to this early warning, they have to meet. It is the unanimity of everyone in attendance. And I do think this is a clever idea. Majority voting is divisive. But if you say it's a unanimous vote of everyone who comes to the meeting, then they've got to come to the meeting. They cannot take advice about staying away. If they stay away, they don't get a vote. If you have a quorum that says everybody must be there, then people can block a vote by not attending. But what we want is people to be in the meeting so that they can at least try to agree. But if they're in the meeting, they can veto a decision if they disagree with it. We're not in the realm of majority voting. Now, I have found that hugely successful as a dispute resolution system over 21 years. I can only recommend it to you as a form of governance. By the individuals are not liable, the individuals are there to represent the different team members in a meeting. A couple of examples, and can I just check everyone can still hear me? I have this horrible sense of that I'm offline. Am I still going?
Yes, I can hear you well, and I think
good. That's all right. Thank you so much, Claudia. It's just a check.
No, I agree. I important. Thank you.
All right, thank you. A few examples of this early warning and core group system in operation. We're getting towards the latter part of this talk now. Royal Borough of Greenwich Council, Housing Asset Management, they reported in a case study that early warning and core group systems encouraged collective resolution of problems, and that Greenwich suffered no claims, as in no legal claims, under their collaborative contracts. They could see, again, this is real work on real projects with very little money in the public sector and very demanding residents. Similarly, on a very different project, Macclesfield Station Rail Project, the Alliance members reported clear communication strategy under the PPC, core group and early warning systems to create a culture of trust and cooperation so the team could overcome problems on site. Now, these are industry people reporting. This is not an academic statement. These are statements from the participants. And on another trial project, SCMG in Hackney and Haringey in London, the Alliance members used a core group to resolve potential disputes with the benefit of full cost and time information, plus the motive to retain long-term relationships. Now that is, I mean, I was involved in all of those projects over the years before I was an academic. But let's look at that SCMG one, because there are two things here. One, we've used the collaborative contract to clarify profit and cost and time and qualitative and risk issues in the build-up of the contractual relationship and in its evolution over time. That is the nature of a strategic relationship. It's not just a single shot at the time of selection. But you need motivation. People can, of course, abuse a collaborative contract in the same way as they can abuse any contract. They can maneuver in a way that is not in good faith. But if there is the prospect of more work, if we come back to the escape from Groundhog Day, if we have the prospect of more work, they're motivated to do the right thing because they want to retain the long-term relationship. So that is how you change behavior. People always say, how do you change behavior when people are bad and negative? You do it through the prospect of long-term relationships. That is commercially a driver. So we're coming to the end now, and I will be, hopefully, the beneficiary of the government publishing my report. Governments take a long time to do these things, so we'll see when it comes out. But when it does come out, this is what it will say, that these frameworks are important for all the reasons I have said, important to avoid disputes, to resolve disputes in a consensual manner, consistent, if you like, with mediation, but certainly through other techniques. But they're not automatically the solution unless they conform to this gold standard. I have not had the time today to tell you the problems encountered where people are not doing the right thing through their frameworks, but trust me, the industry has shared many fascinating insights that will appear in this report. So putting the problems to one side and looking at what will work, constructing the gold standard will recommend, and I'm told the government support this, multi-party relationships through, of course, a contract like FAC1. So we have agreed objectives, agreed measures of success, agreed targets, and agreed incentives, and we share a commitment to improve value and reduce risk. We're not privately doing it, we're doing it together. A timetable I've so many agreements I've seen are full of beautiful objectives and aspirations, but no timetable for doing actions, for actually making progress, and that is important for managers. So a timetable of actions to improve integration, value and outcomes, linked to all the other tools we have in front of us, like BIM and other digital technologies and modern methods of construction and ESI supply chain collaboration. These are practical tools. You put them in a contract. You don't leave them out of the contract. The contract is the place to bring these things to life. And transparent costing, and call-off and performance measurement, so that people understand the costs, they understand how they will win work in a fair manner, how their performance will be measured, what incentivizes their work, how to get a fair return through transparent profitability, and to drive value, not this race to the bottom, not this race to the lowest price. And of course, joint risk management, using those early warning and core group decision-making techniques. And I suppose who's going to make this all happen in reality? Managers. This is the work of the client individuals and the consultants who have to understand and lead management systems that support collaboration and avoid disputes. So that brings me to the end. I really hope that I've conveyed the connection between collaborative instruments, collaborative systems, and the work of mediators, the application of mediator skills in other ways to collaborative systems for improving value and reducing risk. And I hope that when my report goes into the public domain, and as you can tell, I'm a little impatient for that, that this gold standard for frameworks will capture a strategic vision of collaborative procurement that improves value, manages risks, and avoids the Bermuda Triangle and escapes from Groundhog Day. And thank you very much indeed for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I think that this was fascinating. You covered so many different aspects, and really, we would have to have, a long conversation to cover so, different perspectives that you touched upon. And now, since we are in the mediation context, I'd just like to comment on a couple of things that you mentioned. And I would like to really stress the importance of disclosure of information, sharing of information. And I think that from your experience, this came out very clearly that it is a fundamental aspect of construction contracts for the very purpose of delivering value, as you say. So sharing information, mediators know that it's a very first step that needs to be really done. And sometimes we see that parties are reluctant. There is a big cultural, let's say, cultural reluctance. And so I think this is a key point that needs to be really borne in mind by professionals. So help parties sharing information. And then the other point, which in my mind was extremely interesting, is consensus building. And you were saying that you have seen that in practice, it works so much better when parties do sit down and they all spend the time to agree upon, and this is done by way of dialogue mainly. And so in this respect, I would like to ask you, do you see the importance of using collaborative negotiation techniques when parties are at the negotiation table? We all know that people may use different styles of negotiation. So the traditional adversarial system that still being used in many occasions. In my experience, does not lead to great results. Usually you achieve much more when you sit at a negotiation table with a collaborative approach. And I was wondering whether, in your opinion, do you see the need for more training on collaborative negotiation techniques?
Okay, I take a different viewpoint. I think that conceptually, my learning comes from the concept of enterprise contracting and enterprise planning. And Ian McNeill was a US guru, as far as I'm concerned, looking at contractual types. I think that what I'm trying to say there, Claudia, is if we have a system for going from incomplete to complete information jointly, we should use it. Any system that avoids negotiation, avoids people taking different positions, because you can of course adopt a different mindset in negotiation, but at the end of the day you're trying to build a bridge between two different banks of a river. That is a lot of work. I haven't worked this metaphor out in terms of what you have instead of a bridge, but the point is that if you take the supply chain collaboration, here we've agreed the profit of the main contractor, and we have a system for building up the remaining information where we work with the main contractor. We're not negotiating with him, saying, give us your best price for the structural steel, give us your best price for the mechanical equipment. We're saying, okay, let us agree 3 suppliers who you invite bids from while we look over your shoulder, and we sit in a room with you and we consider their ideas. And then you are working in a team with the tier 1 contractor who you are usually negotiating with. Because if you're negotiating with them, they have to on their own go off and find the subcontract bidders and interpret the subcontract bidders' information in whatever way they think you want to hear. So I suppose what I'm saying is this mindset is important, but recognizing that the person in the room is not the only player, and that they don't have all the information at their fingertips, and they're not in a position and that they shouldn't be left alone to resolve all those issues. If you can directly access the other parties, you can work with some of those you would normally negotiate with. So I don't take anything away from what you've said. The answer is yes, people should be trained, not only in collaborative negotiation, in collaborative techniques. I think we need to recognize there are techniques that are not being used. They do not involve any risk. They don't involve embarrassment or giving up an advantage. I absolutely agree with you, Claudia, that teaching people how to share information, making sure that they protect their intellectual property, that we distinguish between what should be shared and what should not be shared. We have a commercial approach. Got to teach them that. And then we've got to teach them where is negotiation needed, but where is there another system that would deliver even better results because it avoids negotiation. So I think that's a long and not very clear answer, but enterprise planning and enterprise contracting are really interesting notions that, as I said, they come from the US. I've evolved them in my work, and I think there's more to be done there.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. I think we have another question, which I'll read to you. Is this similar with FIDIC? Would a dispute prevention board assist in reducing disputes and ultimately assist in ensuring a smoother project? That's from one of the...
Yeah, I think the FIDIC dispute avoidance and adjudication board is excellent. I mean, that is absolutely excellent. Now, I'm sitting on a task group for FIDIC at the moment, exploring the potential for a FIDIC collaborative contract. So I have to be careful what I say and what I don't say. But the current version of FIDIC which was, I think, what, 2017, does not have early contractor involvement. So it doesn't have a way of building up the information that would enable a dispute avoidance and adjudication board to do its job. And therefore, it's a bit of a hard task for them to arrive with all their expertise and to deal with information that hasn't been integrated between the contractor, the engineer, that hasn't exposed the subcontract packages. And I still find it incredible that FIDIC have no subcontracts. I find that absolutely bizarre in this day and age. And that FIDIC don't match their main contracts to their consultant appointment. The Red Book and the White Book don't match. So FIDIC is a fixed paradigm of major international projects with major dependence on a lead contractor. I understand that. We put our faith in them, and the DAAB is an enormous help to avoid full-scale arbitration because it explores some of the things we've been talking about. But at the moment, FIDIC is missing many opportunities to, in modern opportunities that are easily comprehensible around the world where FIDIC operates, to prepare better and to integrate better. And that's why I gave that example from Bahrain. I adapted FIDIC because I was in legal practice then. And those sort of adaptations for the lawyers on the call, are the way to do it because FIDIC has so much to offer. But there's no point in pretending it does everything just because it's called FIDIC. It is missing some tricks.
Thank you very much. And then I just saw a comment by Eugenio Zoppis. Thank you, Eugenio, and nice to see you again, who says that there are correlations between collaborative dispute resolution methods and collaborative risk management. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Well, absolutely. And Eugenio is, for those of you who don't know, doing doctoral research at King's under my supervision on collaborative risk management, and has gone into this in a level of detail beyond anything I'd ever done. I think that the whole spectrum of collaborative risk management is, again, worth looking at. There is a very good international standard on collaboration that recognises collaborative risk management issues, but again, there's a lot of work to do there, and I'm enjoying seeing how Eugenio's research progresses.
Thank you very much again. I think we are now running out of time. So I thought it was fascinating, and I thank you again, Professor Mosey, and the organizers, and all the participants. So all the best.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone. Hopefully see you soon at more events, IMAL. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.